Well, first of all, I really salute Caroline Nokes. I've got a lot of respect for her. She and I have worked together on many things, and I think that she has shown great leadership here. She's chair of the Women and Equalities Committee. She's doing work that is to help women across the country, and by coming forward and being prepared to speak out against to make an allegation of sexual harassment, and it is sexual harassment, it may even be sexual assault, obviously that's to be confirmed. But, you know, what Caroline said is really important because it shows other women that we can speak out and that we should speak out. I salute her, I support her, and I very much hope that this is properly investigated and urgently.
So what should that investigation look like?
Well, it could be a criminal matter. It very much depends, and part of this will depend on what Caroline wants to do. I certainly think that the Conservative Party has a duty of care towards all its MPs and all their staff, of course, and to investigate if this is something that there may be a pattern of behaviour here. Is this something that other victims may have experienced? Now, that's what we found with the independent complaints and grievance process in Parliament, is that when one victim speaks up about a particular person on the parliamentary estate, where they've experienced sexual harassment or bullying, others often say, yes, that's happened to me too. And that's because very, very rarely is it a one-off incident. In my experience, I used to work with abusive men before I became an MP. It's very rarely one-off. So when an incident is established, and of course this has to be investigated, very often there will either be other victims or other incidents. And I really hope that the process that the Conservative Party employs allows for other people to come forward, if there are other people, of course.
Didn't happen on the parliamentary estate.
It did not, and
Downing
he's not
Street
an
is
MP.
saying absolutely nothing to do with us. He's not an MP.
Yes, and that's, of course, you know, that's relevant, but they do also have a duty of care towards their own MPs, and I think that should be part of it. That should be part of what they're doing, is supporting Caroline. But I support Caroline whatever she chooses to do on this, and I think she's been very brave, very courageous, and shown women that up with this we will not put. Why should we have to put up with any sort of sexual harassment in this day and age? It's also monstrous that there is this widespread culture of acceptance, which we know, and this is going beyond this particular allegation, that there's so much sexual harassment still taking place in our nightclubs. University students have told me recently about things that are taking place for them when they go out on a night out, and that there's an awful lot to tackle, and I think we need to tackle this culture of sexism and misogyny that's still around, sadly. It breaks my heart, actually, because I've been working on this for so long, to see that young women are still having to put up with some of the things that I thought should be consigned to history years ago.
We should say, of course, absolutely, we should say that Stanley Johnson says he has no recollection of this incident. He has nothing to say.
He does indeed say that.
He doesn't know who Caroline Nokes is, so the lawyers are happy. As far as hearing from the Home Secretary overnight, she has talked about what's been happening in Liverpool as a result of dysfunctional asylum system.
Well, that's extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, the Tory party has actually been in charge of the asylum system for the past 11 years.
I know, just to interrupt, I did put that to Anne-Marie Trevelyan, who was here for the government this morning. She says, not under this Home Secretary's watch. You have to look further back to Sajid Javid, and as a result, Priti Patel is doing a much better job.
Well, that's a very unedifying Tory-on-Tory fight, isn't it? It's still a Conservative party that's been running the country for the last 11 years. They've been running the asylum system. And over the course of successive Home Secretaries since I've been an MP, I've noticed a serious deterioration in the adherence to their own service standards. It used to be, when I first came in 2015, you could, on behalf of a constituent who had applied for asylum, at least get information out of the Home Office in a timely manner, and more often than not they would stick to their service standard of making a decision within 6 months. Now that's in everybody's interests. Making a fair and proper decision within 6 months is in the interest of those who are concerned about whether or not these are asylum seekers with a good cause, and those of us who've worked with many asylum seekers and know that the majority, and the Refugee Council's research has shown this overnight, majority of people arriving here do have a valid claim to be heard. Now, we are a country that respects human rights, and we should be proud of that. If Priti Patel wants to reform the asylum system, she shouldn't start by punishing people who are trying to flee desperate circumstances. And unfortunately, that's going to be the effect of her Nationality and Borders Bill. There are different ways of doing things. One of the things we can do is increase our support for what's called resettlement. That's where we take people on safe and legal routes from war zones, from near to conflict zones, and provide them with the appropriate assessment, in country and then support to resettle here, and so they don't have to make dangerous journeys. It's hollow words, I'm afraid, from Priti Patel. She's talking about cracking down on traffickers or making sure people can't get here on small boats. She doesn't seem to realise that the way to do that is to make sure that we have proper support to help people fleeing desperate circumstances on safe and legal routes and not punish those who get here because they're desperate very often. Her current proposals are not fit for purpose. We would do things differently.
My viewers would say, some of them in response would say, yeah, but some of these people coming are terrorists and they are blowing up people in the United Kingdom.
And that's why we should have a proper system. And, you know, I don't disagree, we need a robust system. Of course we do. And there are good assessment processes in place. Unfortunately, what I've seen, my experience of the Home Office is that, unfortunately, it's woefully inadequate. It's been hollowed out in terms of staffing. I think if Priti Patel wants to make the system work better, she should make sure that there is adequate staffing, that processes are adhered to, that the assessments are done in a timely manner. That's not what's happening at the moment. And I think she needs to look to her own department rather than fling stones at others.
How much does it help to conflate the two issues of a dysfunctional asylum system and what happened in Liverpool? We heard from the Mayor of Liverpool yesterday, and he says there is online hate and he is doing everything he can to try to unite the people of Liverpool. It's a very difficult time.
It is a difficult time, and I salute the people of Liverpool and the emergency services and all those who've been involved in responding to this awful, awful incident. And I do think that the people of Liverpool are very strong and they will come together and they will unite. And terrorism isn't per se caused by asylum seeking. There are many routes into terrorism. We have to look at what's causing the hate and division in our society. There are many causes. They all need to be taken on board. And I'm glad that the Mayor of Liverpool and others in Liverpool have spoken out so strongly on the need for unity and coming together and uniting against hate.
MPs are going to be voting later on second jobs or starting to vote on what that actually means. I've got lots of questions like, what are reasonable limits? Is that hours or is it remuneration? Who decides what is a second job? Who's going to be in charge of any appeals process? And why is all of this not clear, given that you're voting on it today?
Well, why is it not clear? Any order I want. Great. OK, so what is a second job? We've put forward some proposals that at the very least, and that's what we're going to vote on today, these paid political strategy, consultancy, advisory roles, MPs should not be allowed to do that. Now, this is not new. We're not new to this. We actually put forward this proposal in 2015 before Eve and I became an MP. And the Tory government, I'm afraid to say, voted it down. If they'd voted with us, they might not have been in such a mess over the Owen Paterson affair, I'm afraid. So that's the first thing. That's already been defined by the Committee on Standards of Public Life. They are an independent public body whose job it is to scrutinise not just what MPs do, but all public life and come up with appropriate recommendations to strengthening the system. So that's the first thing. There were a lot of questions there. I think who should adjudicate? There is already, as I said, the Committee on Standards in Public Life, which sets up and reviews those systems. We also have the ministerial code, and now that needs strengthening. And I think
who should you be able to appeal to if you don't agree?
Well, we already have an appeals process for MPs, and this has been one of the myth-making.
Not according to the Conservative.
Yes, I know, and that's just not true. That's just simply not true. The appeals process is you start with the Independent Standards Commissioner. She investigates, makes her recommendation. That's put to the Standards Committee. They have an appeals process that's above and beyond courts of law. So all these faux outraged comments that we've had from Tory MPs over the last few weeks is really willfully ignorant of the process we already have. The Standards Committee has lay members on it. It has a balance between lay members and parliamentarians. It's balanced between the parties. And what they do is review the evidence, take more evidence, hear from more witnesses. They allow the person appealing, which in this case was Owen Paterson, for instance, to make more representations to them. They consider all of that, and then they determine whether or not they want to uphold the Standards Commissioner's findings or not. And very often they disagree. That has happened. In this case, they found that the evidence was absolutely massive.
Yeah, they did. Have you got a second job?
I do not. I mean, I consider being an MP a vocation. In my time as an MP,
You're a proper goody two-shoes, aren't you?
Well, I think that for an awful lot of MPs, we consider this as something that we are 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now, There are occasions when certain colleagues, and I absolutely salute them for this, for instance, Rosanna Allen Khan, I don't think anybody really thinks the problem with sleep is working in an NHS A&E, especially during the COVID crisis. Nadia Whittome went back to her old job as a care assistant when it was needed. There's Tory MPs who are doctors and nurses, people who are Army reservists. I don't think anyone thinks that's the problem here. I think people know where the problem is, and it's these paid, basically lobbying jobs, effectively, where MPs, instead of doing what is best for their constituents and the country, we make a vow to the country, are putting the interests of private companies who've paid them before their constituents, before the company. That cannot be right. And our motion today would settle that very clearly. It didn't come out of nowhere. We've already put it to the Tory government 6 years ago. The Committee on Standards of Public Life recommended it 3 years ago. It's time to put this right, and I hope the Tories vote with us today.